So for recording purposes, this is the impact of health practices on the environment. Right, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start off with this slide here. What are some examples of pollution, right? We all grew up knowing that what pollution it's harmful to the environment, and also because it's harmful to the environment, but by extension, it's going to be harmful to us, human beings, and also to wildlife around us. Now, believe it or not, pollution can be broken up into different categories, right? So we're going to break it up into three major categories, which is what the syllabus kind of hints at: domestic, agricultural, and industrial. Domestic is anything from the house. So I want you all to think about your house and what in your house can actually contribute to pollution. And then we could think about how agricultural practices, like people who have farms and whatnot, how that can actually contribute to what pollution. And then industries, like places that have huge factories and whatnot, we all know that they also add pollution to the environment. So let's start off here quickly. I want you all to think up some examples of domestic, agricultural, and industrial pollution, but we're going to start with domestic, your house. So let's start off with that. I want everyone to give me an example of how your house can contribute to pollution of the environment. So some examples of domestic pollution is the garbage we produce every day. And inside those garbage bags that we put outside for the garbage truck, we have things like plastics, right? That's very, very, very bad for the environment. And I know what you might be saying. After we put the garbage bag for the garbage truck to take up, that's not our problem. It is, because those garbage bags with the plastics and other harmful pollutants from our house end up in a landfill. And sometimes they don't even end up in a landfill. We all know there are people out there who are guilty of dumping garbage close to rivers and whatnot, right? So our house produces a lot of materials that can pollute the environment. And it's not only garbage. What about sewage? When we use our washrooms and whatnot, we all know all of those things go into a septic tank. What happens from that point? And we're going to learn. I know a lot of people know of a septic tank that has all our waste, bodily waste and whatnot. But have you ever stopped to think what happens after the sewage goes into the septic tanks? How much people here know how a septic tank works? A septic tank is just not a container, a very simple container to hold your waste in it. And also, in Trinidad, most people might have a good septic tank, but there are a lot of people around the world who don't have a proper septic tanks. And the type of toilet system that we have here to dispose of our waste, there are different types of toilet systems around the world, okay? And some of them have advantages and some of them have disadvantages. And if you don't have a proper septic system at home, that sewage, when you flush that toilet, will, if it's not in a proper system, it will leak into the environment. And that could be not only very, very, disgusting, but it can also harm everything around it. So what about agricultural? What about agricultural pollution, right? Agricultural pollution. We all know farmers, well, not only farm, people just in general, when they're farming and whatnot, we use fertilizers. Now, fertilizers are not bad, and insecticides are not really too bad. It's just that if you use it in what? Excess, right? So you have pesticides, insecticides, you have fertilizers. When you use too much of these things, The excess, when rain falls, it can wash them down into what? Drains and rivers and streams. And a lot of people grew up hearing that, hey, pesticides, fertilizers, and those things, when it reaches into the environment, it's bad for the environment. It pollutes the environment. But if I were to ask you, why? Why, if extra fertilizer gets washed down into rivers and streams, why is that bad? I want some answers without Google. So excess fertilizer actually causes something called eutrophication. That's a real big word that we're going to learn later on. Eutrophication is it kills excess animals and plants. And of course, I have to explain how that works. Now, how else can agriculture affect the environment? What about if somebody is a farmer is living close to a river, let me just say, and it has a lot of trees and whatnot. So he takes his tractor and cuts down or pushes down all the trees. Okay, let's say he does that. Is it possible when rain falls, the soil can more easily get washed into the rivers and streams? Remember, trees do what? Trees and vegetation do a very good job at binding to the soil. However, when we remove vegetation, it makes it easy for something called soil erosion to happen. And when soil erosion happens and that excess soil goes into the rivers and streams, couldn't it dirty or pollute the drinking water? Let's say that there's a village not too far down from him that depends on the water from the streams and the rivers to drink and cook and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, soil begins to show up in the water. It makes the soil, the water unusable for the village. It has polluted the water. Okay, water contamination, right? You could call it well, the phrase I'm going to be using is soil erosion, and it runs off the land into the rivers. Let's talk about the industry. I know there are more examples. Let me talk about the industry. Now, this is the one that a lot of people get wrong. Because when I ask about industrial pollution, most people think about what? All the smoke and fumes coming from what? Factories, right? Smoke emissions, right? And that's true. You get some very, very toxic gases coming out of industries like carbon dioxide. It have sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, right? And you actually get some, and also industrial areas tend to be in a lot of city areas. So there's a lot of cars. So you get pollution from the exhaust of cars. Now, those are common sense things. But there are other types of pollution that are associated with industries. Let me get my marker here, right? Like let's say this is a factory over here. So we all know what? We all know smoke emissions are going to come out. And that's easy. The name of the actual gases that come out, I will give you that later. But tell me something. Would you like to, let me say all the smoke disappeared from the factory. Would you like living near a huge factory? No. One, it's going to be very, very noisy. So you get something called noise pollution. And yes, noise pollution is something real. That is considered an official type of pollution. What about light? Remember, most industries have a lot of light and lighting and whatnot. That's light pollution. Believe it or not, too much light can affect plant growth because plants actually need in the nighttime, the plants need time to rest. Okay, when there's too much light around, the plant doesn't actually rest properly. When there's too much light, it causes the plants to continuously photosynthesize. In the nighttime, plants are not supposed to photosynthesize. Too much light, you can think about it keeps the plant awake. And of course, it affects plant growth in the long run. Another overlooked thing about industries, a lot of industries produce a lot of hot water for cooling purposes, a lot of industries. And what they normally do, right, when they're finished with the hot water, they send it down a tube, and that hot water is dumped into the rivers or oceans. Do you think that hot water is going to be beneficial to all the fish and wildlife in that area? Or do you think it's going to kill? Because that's hot water coming in. So hot water can actually what? Harm the environment. And that comes mostly from industries, okay? So that's just a few things there. Also, we all know some industries are guilty of dumping all their waste products close to rivers or even in rivers. So that's illegal, but by the way, but some industries do that. Okay. So let's look at a summary of everything that we just did. Right? So just some common sense things here, just in case we don't know, because I'm going to be using referring to these things all the time. A lot of industries dump things called toxic heavy metals into the environment, right? Now, whenever you hear the phrase toxic heavy metals, there are many toxic heavy metals, but the one that the syllabus is going to be referring to is lead and mercury. Now, I'm going to trust that everyone here grew up hearing that lead and mercury are dangerous. And whenever you have those things in your house, your parents would say, hey, stay far from those things. Things that have lead and mercury, stay far from them. If you are exposed to those things, it can kill you. And lead causes kidney damage, and it can also cause miscarriages and reduce the sperm count in males. Mercury, very dangerous, can cause blindness if you're exposed to it, and it can also damage your nervous system. So whenever you try to think or move and whatnot, your nervous system doesn't work properly, and you can't walk, function, hold things in your hand properly. I mentioned this one here, soil erosion. If a farmer does what? Grade down the land, the soil can easily flow into the rivers and streams and pollute the water. Also, the thing about fertilizers, right? Algae. I don't know if you all know what algae is. You ever go to a pond or a river and you see this green substance floating on it? That's a living organism called algae. And algae loves oxygen, and get this, fertilizer. So wherever there's a lot of fertilizer in a stream or a pond, the algae begins to grow, but it soon gets out of control. And when it gets out of control, you all will see in a little while why too much algae is bad for the environment. Right, so let's move on. Right, so in the exam, you're going to have to get some definitions down to get full marks in the exam. They like to do what, right? Ask you to define pollutions, and they like to ask you to define pollutants. Okay? So a pollutant and right? Sorry. A pollutant and a pollution is obviously slightly different. There is a grammar behind it, but they love to trick you with this one. The pollutant is the actual substance that goes into the environment. Pollution is more like the act of doing it. So I'm just going to read it back here for you. Pollution is the introduction of a harmful material into the environment. And pollutant right? A pollutant is the actual substance. A pollutant is a substance released into the environment due to natural or human activity, which adversely affects the environment. In case you don't know what adversely means, it means in a bad way. Right? So guys, so when you print out the notes, make sure you learn these two definitions. And when you get the question in the exam, make sure and read it properly, because they could be asking for the definition of pollution or a pollutant. And if you write the wrong one, you're obviously not going to get the marks. Right? Right. So a few people ask, what we know mercury is bad. Can anybody quickly just do this Google, because I don't know offhand, what substances, well, what house substances contain mercury? I can only give one off the top of my head. A thermometer. Some people have a thermometer in their house. Thermometers, which measure temperature, are notorious for having mercury in them. Can anybody else, through Googling, give me some examples of things that have mercury in them that you can find in your house, right? So examples of things that have mercury in them are light bulbs, thermometers. A lot of people are saying batteries, paints. I forgot that paints have a lot of mercury in them. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. So, right, so here's a little summary of examples of domestic, agricultural, and domestic pollution. Remember, domestic is pollution that comes from your house. You all can just quickly give this a read. I just don't want to read back everything on the screen, but I think we discussed it enough for most people to understand what's going on here. By the way, in the exam, right, if they ask what pollution comes out of cars, I don't like people saying the exhaust or gases come out the muffler. Please don't say things like that in the exam. It's not specific enough. Cars, the harmful stuff that comes out a car's muffler is carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides. You want to say those two things. At least don't say gas or exhaust. The examiner is going to raise his eyebrow and say, you're not being specific enough. Let me know when you finish reading everything on the screen. If you have any questions regarding anything else on the screen, let me know and I'll try my best to answer. Oh, we have a little game to play today, right? So how this game works, right? It's in the future, and apparently in the future, candy is they have banned candy for human consumption. So people sell it now on the black market. All right, I'll show you how the game works. So we have a little glass container here, and we're going to set off some bombs, and the bombs are going to free the candy behind it. And the more candy we free, the more we can sell. So everyone, quickly, choose a letter, choose a bomb. Choose a bomb, choose a bomb. All right, so we're gonna set off the bomb now, and let's see how much candy we get. All right, let's crack the glass there, and let's see how much candy we got. How much candy did we get? For example, if it's B, you got 3 candies. 1, 2, 3. If it's C, you got 2 candies. The clear winner here is to count how much candy we got, and we are going to sell it on the black market to our we are supplying an underground little boss here with candy. All right, let's go. So this is the person that we're going to sell it to. His name is Slick Mick, and he's going to test our candy over here, and then he's going to cut us a deal. So remember how much candy you got, right? He says the quality of this candy is average. I'll give you $4 per candy. Let me know how much money you got, right? If you got 2 candies, you multiply it by 4. If you got 6 candies, keep track of how much money you have. At the end of class, we'll see who has the most amount of money, right? That's Slick Mick there. So his price today is $4 per candy. All right. So here, the exam gets pretty detailed, right, on how to use domestic, like whenever they ask you to state some examples of domestic pollution, they might not only ask you to state, they might also ask you to explain each example that you provide. Now, you all can see the amount of writing this has, right? So this is why I suggested that today we're not doing any writing. You just need to read, participate, and you can ask any questions about what's on the slides. So here are some 4 examples that we mentioned before of domestic pollution, right? And of course, I try to explain each one in detail. I want you to read through all 4, ask me any questions, and I'll try my best to answer. Carbon monoxide, I think everyone has heard, well, carbon monoxide is dangerous and carbon monoxide can actually kill you, right? The question is why, and this is actually part of the syllabus, and it kind of goes back to biology. What part of your body, it's a very, very small part of your body that's responsible for carrying oxygen around your body? Think back hard. We did it, you would have done it a few weeks ago with the homework, and I also mentioned it in class. What structure in your body carries the oxygen or transports the oxygen around the body to all the cells in your body? Austin, correct. Jordan, correct. Not the answers, not the lungs. Let me see what you all remember. What do you think? I'm going to draw it for you all. It looks like this. What am I drawing there? What is that device? Well, structure. It can only be one thing, right? It's a red blood cell, right? A red blood cell is responsible for what? Carrying oxygen around the body. So let me just write it here, even though I draw it there. Red blood cell. What happens? The oxygen, I'm going to use orange for oxygen. The oxygen, I'll use yellow, so it shows up. The oxygen will bind to what? The red blood cells. So these yellow dots are like oxygen. So you can think of it like this. The oxygen sticks on to the red blood cells. I'm using that word very, very loosely. The correct word is bind, B-I-N-D, right? And of course, it's like a huge taxi service now. The oxygen will be transported to all the cells in the body. And we all know why we need oxygen for respiration. Without oxygen, you cannot have respiration, which is how our body produces energy. Carbon monoxide hampers this process. It's like this. Let's say the red blood cell is a taxi service and the oxygen is like the passengers. Have you all ever had this experience? You stop a taxi, let's pretend you are oxygen, and you are about to go into the taxi, and then somebody rushes you and pushes you aside, and that person takes the taxi from you. You don't see it in movies, right? It's real dramatic, right? I guess then you all can imagine that process. Carbon monoxide is like that. Carbon monoxide is the one that pushes the oxygen aside and jumps into the taxi service. So it kind of hijacks the taxi. So in other words, when there's too much carbon monoxide in your system, right, the oxygen doesn't get a spot on the red blood cells. Hence, oxygen cannot reach your cells to perform respiration. And that is how it kills you. Okay? And then there have been instances where people have their air conditions on in their cars. And the carbon monoxide that's coming out your muffler, sometimes there's a little leak in it. And instead of all the carbon monoxide going out your exhaust, it leaks into the car. But remember, your air condition on and the windows up. And it is gradually kill you slowly. You just reach a point where you don't realize that you're dying. You just get sleepy, 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 and your head is just drop. And that's the end of you from there. And it has happened in the past. So carbon monoxide is really deadly. All right. So I trust, well, I think I answered the question there. Let's move on. Here are some examples of in more detail about agricultural pollution. Give this a proper read, right? If there's any terms you don't understand, I know that a lot of people won't know exactly what eutrophication is. I will explain that later down by giving a little summary. Eutrophication is when too much fertilizers end up in ponds and streams and too much algae begin to grow. You call it an algae bloom. That's when your whole pond just has algae in it. And I will explain in detail how that is harmful to the environment. Right, and industrial, I know this is a little boring, but read through the examples of industrial pollution, right? By the way, I know somebody's gonna ask about this one. Thermal is heat pollution. Remember what we had discussed, that when industries use hot water to cool down things, they usually dump that hot water into rivers and oceans and streams. Thermal just means heat. So when you hear about thermal pollution, it's pollution due to hot things like water. Let me know when you're finished as you. Right. All right, so now we get to eutrophication. Now, don't start to read all that writing on the screen there, right? That will just confuse you. Let me explain it first, and then you could read everything on the screen, and I guarantee you it will make sense. Okay, so let's say we have a real nice pond. Anybody here grew up with a pond at the back of their house? Like every morning, for people who have parents or farmers, or you're living in the countryside, you would wake up in the morning and there would be a huge pond at the, oh, I didn't either. I just like to imagine that I didn't. All right. So here we have a pond, and it has some nice creatures in it. It has fish. I'm sure there's water snails inside it. It might have a few crabs and whatnot. And also it have plants. Yes, plants can live underwater, right? So it have some underwater plants. A real nice ecosystem there. Okay? Tell me something. Do the plants and fish, do they need oxygen to live? That's an obvious question, right? Plants and animals, I don't care if it's underwater plants and fish need oxygen, right? The oxygen is actually dissolved in the water, and the fish gills extract the oxygen. So the point is, all living things need oxygen. Also, the plants need sunlight. Now, do the fish need sunlight? Not really directly, but plants need sunlight, and fish will eat the plants. So if the plants die, then the fish, by extension, will also die. So remember I mentioned that there's this organism called algae. That's the green gooey stuff you see floating at the top of ponds. So I'm going to get some green here. Let's say that we have a pond that with some algae in it, not plenty, just one or two algae minding their own business, right? Floating on top of the pond. Well, that's not bad. But remember, algae love fertilizer. So right now, there isn't plenty fertilizer in the pond. But let's say the farmer uses too much fertilizer. Let me say he has a tomato farm, and every day he just throwing fertilizer on it like a madman. Obviously, that's going to be too much fertilizer. And when rain falls, it's going to wash the excess fertilizer into the pond. And like I said, who loves fertilizer? Algae. So the algae begins to eat the fertilizer. No, like that, right? And then the algae population begins to grow and grow and grow and grow. And until there is too much algae, so much algae, and algae floats at the top of the pond. The algae population grows so much, it forms a thick barrier of algae. Now, keep in mind, algae is living, so the algae, ALGAE, need oxygen also. So what's going to happen? Two things are going to happen here. There's so much algae there. The algae is going to use up all the oxygen in the pond. So if the algae begins to use or suck up all the oxygen in the pond, the poor fish, the poor fish is going to die. He's going to suffocate. Okay? And remember, plants also need oxygen for what? For respiration purposes, right? So now the plant's going to die. But the plants are going to get it two ways. Because first of all, the algae is stealing the oxygen. So the plants and fish and everything suffering. But the plants also need sunlight. Remember, in a pond, without the algae, some sun rays can penetrate the water. But when the algae begins to grow, it forms a barrier. So when the sunlight tries to reach into the pond, it gets rejected. Now the plants cannot perform photosynthesis. And then everything just begins to die out in the pond, right? And the only person who's going to be living in the pond is the algae. But you don't need algae, right? You need the fish and you need the plants. Read through everything on the screen. Let me know if what I just said is in the notes there. Of course, confirm if you understand. Let's go, right? All right, so let's play the game here. Choose a bomb, guys. Choose a bomb. And we're going to sell our candy to the black market, to the underground candy mafia. So I got some music running here. All right, let's get the bombs going. Grasses. Okay. Count up how much candies they get. I feel sorry for the people who chose E. He only has one candy. F seems to be the winner here. F has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Don't do your calculations yet. The price of the candy changes depending on the market. And the quality of the candy. All right, let's go to a meet. All right, let's see. Slick Mick test our candy. He's gonna cut us a deal. Oh, these are high quality candies. He'll give you $7 for the batch you just got. $7 per candy. So do your calculation. Do your calculations and let's see how much you got. You can let me know your total. All right. Right, some people are rolling in the money here. Navid, you're rolling in the money there with $63. Well done, well done. Somebody has 50. All right, let's go. All right, so let's see if we can fill out some things here. How can pollution affect the environment? What word do you think I'm trying to say here? What phrase? With the jog here, with the thing. What can pollution affect? All right, so that's obviously water contamination, right? We're just trying to figure out some general terms that you hear that pollution is associated with. In the next picture, the one with the fish, you see like it have aquatic creatures and it dying out. What do you call that in biology? Whenever you have animals in an ecosystem, and because of something, right, the species begin to die out and thing. That's biodiversity, right? Biodiversity is when organisms begin to die out in an ecosystem. And they can also make certain organisms extinct in extreme cases. The one with the plant dying, right? Obviously, plants need proper soil, right? Now, whenever you, like farmers, and I'm not saying all farmers, right? But when farmers, sometimes people just grade down lands and it causes soil erosion. And that leads to what? Not only soil degradation, degradation. I have a pronunciation problem there. Now, let me explain something. A lot of people associate soil degradation with erosion. Like when you remove all the vegetation and the wind and water fall, it washes away all the nutrients from the soil. And that is true. But pollution itself, I'm talking about toxic chemicals and things. Like when industries dump toxic chemicals in the soil itself, couldn't that lessen the value of the soil? It degrades the soil. Nobody wants to plant in a lot of land that has mercury and a whole lot of toxic materials in it, right? The plant just simply isn't going to grow. And pollution can cause what? It's, a lot of people got the last one. What phrase am I trying to say in the last one? You see a guy sweating and the sun is real hot, dead trees all around. What phrase am I trying to say over there? Ruiz, correct. I think I'm pronouncing the name correct. Ruiz, correct. Anybody else? The last one. What? Sammy, correct. No, Leah, check it back. It's two words. What two words am I trying to say there? Pollution is associated with also with what? It's not only associated with water contamination, soil degradation, biodiversity loss. What else is pollution associated with? Guys, I thought this would have been the easiest one, right? It's climate change. All this talk about global warming and whatnot going on, right? Like literally, almost everybody got this one wrong. Only about 3 people got it correct. But climate change, well, if you didn't know, now you know, right? So climate change is associated with pollution. We always hear about these things called greenhouse gases. Can anybody give me some examples of greenhouse gases? I just need two. What are two examples of greenhouse gases that are associated with global warming, which is a type of climate change? Carbon dioxide, and other one of them stands with the letter M. We'll get it, we'll write it later on. But what are the two major greenhouse gases? Carbon dioxide and methane, correct, methane. Right? Oh, which one is deadlier when it comes to which one is more potent at causing global warming? Carbon dioxide or methane? Which one is more potent, more dangerous for global warming? It's methane, correct, right? Right, Leilu, that's another example also, but we'll get to that later on. But you are correct, Leilu. All right. Things that not maybe obvious examples of pollution around us. Okay. Anybody ever hear about something called ozone? Ever hear that term, the ozone layer? Which part is the ozone layer? Which part? Let's give me a general idea of where I can find this thing called the ozone layer. It's found high up in the atmosphere, right? Not high up in the atmosphere, there's something called the ozone layer, right? Many miles up in the atmosphere, in the sky, okay? But did you all know that you can find ozone, well, man-made ozone due to pollution right by your feet? Like you could be walking around in a city and there may be ozone. Ozone is a substance, by the way. Ozone is a lot of, okay, let me explain what ozone is, because a lot of people say the word ozone, but you don't know what it is, right? So let me just tell you what ozone is. Everybody knows what has a general idea of oxygen. We need oxygen to do what? Breathe. Oxygen is very useful. The symbol for oxygen in chemistry is the letter O. Thank God it have an easy symbol. O for oxygen. Can't ask for anything simpler than that. The oxygen that we breathe is two oxygens combined together. You call it O2. So if you take two oxygen atoms and you stick them together, you get the useful oxygen, the type of oxygen we need. So we need this one for respiration. O2 is the good one. However, when three oxygens get stick together, we don't call it normal oxygen. You call that ozone, right? Now, ozone is good at protecting the earth from ultraviolet radiation from the sun, right? But ozone is useful when it's up in the atmosphere, far away from us. However, if ozone, O3, occurs at ground level from pollution, you can actually make ozone from pollution, and you walking around and you breathe it in this ozone, that O3 can damage you. It can damage your health. So ozone is good for protecting the earth, but it's not good when it enters your body. And these are some things that happen. You get chest pain, you get coughing, throat irritation, and congestion, right? You get that from, well, you don't call it normal ozone, right? You just call it ground level ozone, meaning that it's the same ozone, except it's by your feet or close to your nose or something like that. And we all know about the other ones. I already mentioned that lead and mercury are types of pollution associated with industries. Well, lead and mercury are bad. You're not supposed to let it get into your water, so your body. Nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides. A lot of industries produce these gases, and also particle matter. You know when you burn things, you just see a kind of black smoke. That black smoke is actually what you call that particle matter, right? Right? It's the particle matter is usually a substance called carbon. Like when you burn something and you see that black smoke, that black smoke is mainly a substance called carbon, and it's also called particle matter, right? So let's move on, right? You'll be hearing me using these things over and over. Ground ozone, particle matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and lead and mercury. All types of pollution. Right. So effects on human beings, right? All of those types of pollutions that we just mentioned, which a lot of them come from industries, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide. I don't want to say it in the back, but I want it to stick in your head. Ground level ozones, particle matter. Look at the list of human ailments you can get from those things if you're exposed to it for too long. Give it a read, right? Let me know when you are finished. Right. So effects on the environment. That previous slide, don't mix it up with this slide. That previous slide was the effects pollution has on the human body, like how it can make the human body sick. This slide is about how it can affect the environment. But we discussed all of this already. We all know it causes water contamination, soil degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change. But I put a little explanation next to each one in case the examiner asks you to explain each one in detail. Give it a read. Any questions? Shoot. Oh, oh, I forgot I got we could that's all. Here's I just want to bypass this game because I have so much things to discuss here today. Right? How can we deal with pollution? Right? How can we deal with pollution? Let's say that you become the MP for your area, right? So everybody just pretend you're into politics now, and you got elected to be the MP for your area. And everybody comes, so you have a town meeting, and the people are saying, we have a lot of pollution in our town. How can we get rid of pollution? Remember, you are an MP, right? A politician, right? Tell me what you can put in place to make sure pollution is reduced. Let me hear you guys. So you have to look, you have to break this up into two major categories. When it comes to controlling pollution, it has two major categories. It's either you prevent the pollution from happening first, or if the pollution has already happened, it's how you treat with it. Those are two different things. Preventing it from happening in the first place, as opposed to you allow the pollution to happen, or you wasn't able to prevent the pollution from happening, and now you're going to take care of the problem after it has occurred, right? So those are the two methods. Let's look at prevention method. I'm a big fan of prevention because prevention means you're going to stop it from happening in the first place, so you don't have a mess to clean up. And one of the major things is not just regulation. Yeah, we have laws. We all know we have laws that tell us pollution is wrong. Littering and things. Those falls under pollution, and simple things like taking a can and throwing it on the street, or you have a drain and you throw a plastic bottle in. Littering is a type of pollution. But enforcement is very important. It makes no sense to have laws and you don't have an enforcement feature behind it. Okay? I love number 2, education and awareness. Tell me something, right? What are the 2 compulsory subjects in school? What 2 subjects you must have in order to basically, get a job or whatnot when you go out there in the world? Maths and English, right? So education is very important, right? Now, this is just my opinion. If pollution is so important and taking care of the environment is so important, shouldn't that be a mandatory subject in school? What do you all think about that? To me, because pollution affects the whole planet, and if we pollute too much, we're not going to have a good planet, right? So education, and not only just having a pamphlet, when people have some sort of awareness program, they just bring one speaker in one day for the month, or you might see the speaker one day for the year. The speaker will tell you about the problem and give you a pamphlet after. Tell me something. Do you think that makes a huge impact? It might have a small impact, but what about if it was part of the education system where it's a compulsory subject, where every day when you go to school, you have a subject that teaches you about pollution and how to prevent it? won't that make a bigger impact, right? So so education and awareness, true education and awareness is a very good step to preventing pollution, right? I'm not a big fan of the pamphlets. They just give you a pamphlet, right? Cool. And then green technology and innovation. This is really good. Yeah, where you are, where your country develops, makes inventions that can what? Not only eradicate pollution or what like the technology does not create pollution. And we kind of there already, like not totally there, but almost there. It have hybrid vehicles that produces less pollution. It have electric vehicles that what make less pollution. So when we get in there, guys, read through everything there, the three ways to enforce prevention of pollution. All right. All right, so I know we're coming close to the end of class there, right? Next week, right? We're gonna start off. Well, actually, we could let's do this one quickly. So, treatment of pollution. This is when pollution has already happened, and we need to take care of the problem, right? So it has things like chemical and biological treatment, where you could throw special chemicals in waters and whatnot to break down the pollutants, right? Special, of course, these chemicals don't cause extra pollution. These are good chemicals that break down pollutants in the environment. It has something called physical treatment, like a lot of factories, right? They create pollution. Right now, most factories don't really have a choice because they just produce pollution. But even though they produce pollution, like all of the smoke and water that's coming out of the chimneys, there is a way to reduce the amount of pollution coming out of those chimneys. And here's one example. You call this, if you read it, you can use filters to filter out some of the pollutants, or something called a scrubber. Now, most people might not know what a scrubber is. It's a very, very simple device. The factory will produce dirty air. Now, the dirty air will try to go through the chimney. This here is a chimney. All they do is, when it's coming out here, they spray the dirty air with water, right? And it has something, well, they have something called a demystifier. Yeah, you know when you spray water and it's coming out of a high pressure, it is create a kind of mist. The demystifier does just get rid of that mist. But it's a very simple device. The polluted air gets sprayed by water. The water will remove the majority of the pollutants, and then the clean air, which remains, goes out into the atmosphere. So it's basically you're power washing the dirty air to get rid of the pollutants. Real simple device. And it's also very good for a country to have a very good waste management and recycling system. Do you all think that right now we have a proper recycling system in the country? Or do you think it needs improvement? What do you all think? Because in my opinion, if I needed to recycle something, let's say you needed to recycle plastics, you gathered a whole set of plastics. Where do you have to go in our country, well, Trinidad, to recycle it? Which part? Well, which part in Trinidad? And what about fluorescent light bulbs? Fluorescent light bulbs, the big long tubes, they have a lot of mercury and whatnot in it. They just always say, do not throw fluorescent light bulbs in the garbage. You are supposed to carry to a facility to recycle it. Where in Trinidad do you carry fluorescent light bulbs to be properly recycled? Nobody knows, right? But and I don't know either. But apparently there are places in Trinidad you can carry it, I heard. Right? So that's obviously just an example, guys. It's just that recycling is very, very, very important to take to treat pollution, right? Give all three a read, right? So these are three examples of how treatment can be used against pollution. And another thing, just think about it, right? It's always good to know. All those old tires, you know, when you go buy a tire shop, they have 1,000,001 old tires stack up. Where do you carry tires in Trinidad to be recycled? Because you're not supposed to throw them in the rivers, because they could clog up the rivers, and two, they could breed mosquitoes in it. So think about those things. Where in Trinidad do you carry plastics to recycle, fluorescent light bulbs to recycle, and old tires? And next week, you all can have an answer for me.